So what I'd like to do here is review a communication, a personal example, and it happens to be the very first paper that I published when I came to McGill. And it has all of the features that you might imagine: rewriting, multiple authors, changing of the name, order of the names, which eventually was done. I put my name first, which I don't do anymore, but I did for a few years because I was new and I was giving an extra comment to my colleague who was at that time at the Belfer School. Eventually he went to University of Copenhagen and is now at Emory, and we've published a number of papers together, and we never had a problem with who was first and so forth in those papers. And eventually that paper becomes about a 6-page double-spaced document. It's sent off to the journal. In that era it was sent by mail, and then a postcard is received and the data about how long it took. The referee took about a month, and the letters that were transferred, and that was equivalent, of course, to what you would now get by email. And then you wait for the editor's decision. And there were 2 referees. And of course, just as you open an email looking for those important words, I opened the letter looking for those important words. And glad is one of those important words. We shall be glad to accept this paper. The rest of it is minor stuff. And it turned out as well, they basically said, subject to your consideration of the referee's comments. And as a beginning assistant professor, I thought this was pretty good, that I would actually have the judgment to say whether I was going to listen to them or not. This is a little bit rare, but not totally rare. So I looked at the first editor, or first referee's comments, and you can read through it, but it basically was a neutral plus. It said it's a pretty good paper, but I don't know that we need to publish it as a communication. Maybe we should wait for more details. That's a very easy out for many referees, and maybe even the right one in some instances. And so I remember thinking, what's up with this? The paper looks like it's going to be accepted, and this is a pretty neutral piece of judgment. But the next one said it all, and it said it in such a lovely way I've never really forgotten it. Significant, interesting, of sufficient urgency, and readable. That's all you want to hear from a referee. Then this referee did something that many referees, I think, should do, sometimes don't. They gave unsolicited suggestions about what that particular chemical process was all about. At the end of the day, I could have used that in the paper and given credit to a referee. I think this is the right thing to do. As it turned out, I don't think this was the right answer, but it was an excellent kind of suggestion and a generous one that referees should try to utilize. And I think this, my very first exposure, was the right one for me, at least. It sets you in the proper direction. So that 7-page double-spaced paper winds up being essentially a page. It's a little bit more, but not much more, in the journal. And here's the top piece. It has a table and some equations and the like. I'd like to describe how it works with names on publications. This turns out to be a fairly complex and talked about issue because it depends primarily on which field of endeavor, at least in science, that you're in. If you're in geology, the name that goes first is the primary author and the one that gets the most public credit. In medicine, it's pretty much the same way, whereas in chemistry, it's often such that the last author is the main author. And when I say main author, I mean the author to whom inquiries are directed, the person who is probably the senior author in the paper, whether they wrote the whole paper or only parts of it, but they're responsible for it. Also in chemistry, an asterisk is applied to the senior author, and then one knows to whom to address requests for information. But it varies a great deal across many disciplines. So if you're in the biological, generally at least the biological or medical area, people talk about being first author as a major issue, whereas it's really not in many other disciplines. The number of names that can be in a paper can vary tremendously. particularly these days in trying to decipher DNA sequencing, there could be as many as 75. And they're not alphabetized. They are in the associations with their particular university or research areas. That's the superscript that you see in this paper. You see an asterisk and number 1, that's probably the senior author to whom information is directed. 91, I don't know that that's a record, but it's certainly a large number of people. Or you could have as few as 1. This is quite rare. C.J. Pedersen, as part of the DuPont company, Elastomer Chemicals division, as you can see from the title, wrote a paper that in 1967, single author paper that received so much attention and created so much functioning in the world of chemistry as to how it really set along the right guidelines as to how molecules self-assemble, which of course is a lot to do with DNA, but this was not even DNA. It was a self-assembly kind of situation with cations like sodium, potassium, and the like, and a particular ring-structured compound. He won a Nobel Prize in 1987 as one of 3 who created that kind of research area that was very important and still remains important, self-assembly of molecules. So the bottom line is that there's no simple formula for the names of authors. For the very many different scientific disciplines, it varies across from first to last as which is important, and any order, whether they're alphabetical, and nearly any number of authors are possible. There is an extended life of this research, and that's important in all research areas because there are summaries of research that can be indexed and can be found now electronically rather than going to the library to find the abstract. And in this case, this was organic chemistry sections, just part of the chemistry, and I don't want to overemphasize chemistry because all the major fields have these summary journals that give you the abstracts. And here's what a series of abstracts looks like. On 2 very thin pages with very small type, there's perhaps in this situation around a dozen abstracts. Our abstract, cut off by a few words which were on the previous page, looked like this: 4 sentences for our particular paper. And now the electronic version, it's the same words, it looks like this, and you can get this online. Well, occasionally a chemical reaction will wind up being propagated a little longer in a textbook. And this goes to the initial idea of how do we know that our textbook stuff is right? I would say that this is right. We did the work and it's held up. Other people have done similar work and it's been okay. But how do you know where it comes from? And this is where it comes from. So here was an advanced text by Jerry March. And our 7-page double-spaced paper with 4 sentences for the abstract shows up in a single sentence, and it's correct. And that's the essentials of it. It's not the details. It just is what took place. Another series of papers that we had, and I'm not trying to emphasize this other than that it shows the direction that it goes for textbook, when textbooks get this information. This was a popular organic chemistry textbook, and we did 4 other publications, had 4 other publications that eventually received some attention in that particular textbook. It's not in every textbook, it happened to be in this one. And here we have some equations, a little bit more, that made it into the textbook, but when this went into an advanced textbook, it showed up as 2 sentences. So 4 papers, 2 sentences, 1 paper, 1 sentence. Maybe it's simply saying your work was only of marginal interest. I don't know. I'm not going to judge that. I think it was a pretty good interest, and with respect to the citations that were received on these sets of papers. But this is the way it generally works. That is, a lot of work goes in. It was only a small part of the thesis of that particular graduate student who wound up being head of research for SmithKline Beecham. He was an excellent researcher. And in this case, a couple of sentences for this work, and that's the case with a lot of papers. What appears in the popular press is going to be an even more let me say it in a different way. It's going to be less detailed in terms of all of the science, but it's going to have maybe more dramatic sounding conclusions that may not be fully justified.